I'd like to introduce today's presenters, Carol Lieb, Senior Manager, Family Programs, New York Peace Institute, and Barbara Shatz Goldstein, Program Associate, Family Programs, New York Peace Institute as well. Barbara and Carol, I'm going to hand it off to you.
Thanks, Rich. Thanks for that lovely introduction. Thanks to Include NYC. You are so generous in inviting us to have this conversation today. And big thanks also for all of the work you do. It is just extraordinary. And we are honored to be invited to work with you on this talk. So here we are. I'm Carol Lieb. I am Senior Manager of Family Programs at New York Peace Institute.
And I'm Barbara Shatz Goldstein. I'm a Program Associate in the Family Division at New York Peace Institute as well. And thank you so much for having me.
Just as Rich said, we are going to do this presentation and take questions at the end. We're going to run about 15 or 20 minutes. Then we'll take your questions. Please put them, you'll see that Q&A piece right at the bottom of your screen. Fill them in. We also recognize that some of your questions, especially about co-parenting, could be private. Don't feel that you have to ask them here. We're going to tell you routes to approach those as well. So we recognize some of those matters might not be appropriate for general audiences. That's okay. We're not going to leave you hanging, okay? So let's talk first about what is co-parenting. Basically, I like to think about it as a coordinated approach between two parents who are not together as a couple, but want to coordinate on a path to parenting their child. So that's really what it is. It's a coordinated path. Now, why is that important? Well, almost every parent I know says it is the hardest job they have and also the most important. You have a real impact on your child, both in the present and also how they're going to flourish as to an adult in the future. And so, of course, as a parent, you want to do the very best you can. But sometimes it's a little bit difficult. And so there are differences, and we're going to talk with you today about how you might approach those differences and the supports you might give. The bottom line is, though, that when parents give really good support to their child, they're removing stress from themselves, they're removing stress from their child, and their child is going to benefit from a really thoughtful approach to their parenting. So let's talk about a child. I'm making this child up, but he's a child that we see in various ways and hear about lots of times. I'm going to call him James. He's 6 years old. He's living with his mom, Betty, he's living with her 4 nights a week and living with his dad, David, 3 nights a week. They live in Brooklyn. They live in the same neighborhood so they can walk back and forth. And this is all pre-COVID. So he's going to school, and it's his community school, and he's going there. Betty and David love James to the bottom of their souls, but they have very different approaches to parenting this child. And they're fighting about it constantly. And they hit lots of snags about what they're going to do. And this is stressing them out. And it's also stressing out James in a very big way. And so now COVID comes in, and there are even more stressors. So what are parents like Betty and David supposed to do? We're going to talk about that. Let's first talk about what happens co-parenting just without this overlay of COVID. Where are those conflicts usually? Basically, conflicts occur when, in different ways, when parents have different philosophies to parenting. So if you like to have every detail in place, but the other parent likes to have kind of loose stuff, that's a problem. Similarly, if you want to have every detail in your place match up with the other parents, but the other parent says, what happens in my house is mine, that's a conflict, right, as well. So that is truly a difficult situation. The point, though, is when you take these difficult situations and you say, I'm going to harness them, I'm going to deal with them, and I'm going to approach them, that is a sign of good parenting because you really care about your child. Really do. You're going to say, I'm going to try to work on what's going on. So, what kinds of issues, for example, could be approached? Sometimes parents talk about how much time does their child live in each of their homes. They have a conflict. So let's say Betty says, I want our child 4 days a week. And David says, James is my son too. He really shouldn't be just with you more time than me. I want it even, or I want the 4 days. You've had him all that time. Now it's my turn to have more. That could lead to a conflict. How are those transfers going to occur? Who walks James to Betty's house? Does Betty pick him up? Does David walk him over? Vice versa. What time does that happen? When people are coming back from work, with school, with homework. When does that happen? And now let's assume that our little boy, James, is getting older. When is he old enough to walk between those houses? Or one parent moves. When is he old enough to go on the subway by himself? All of those matters can lead to conflicts. Similarly, parents want to talk about holidays. Some people want their child on religious holidays like Christmas or Yom Kippur or the last day of Ramadan. Some parents want to share birthdays. Some want to have it with my family and then with your family. What about a parent's birthday? What about Father's Day and Mother's Day? Parents often have difficulty working each one of those things out. And every one of those points becomes a pressure point. And it leads to conflict between the parents. We can help sort those things out in various ways. And Barbara and I are going to talk about those. Similarly, parents sometimes want to talk about things like screen time. Some parents don't want their child watching TV at all. Some say, oh, relax, it's fine. Or nutrition and how best to eat. How about if one of the parents has a new significant other? Let's say David has a new significant other. Does he tell Betty first? How does he tell James? When is it appropriate? When do they introduce one another? All of those matters really, really can lead to lots of conflict. But what I want you to know, the most important thing, if you take nothing else from this is really good parenting. Think about these issues. Thinking about what's best for your child. That is really, really good parenting. And conflict is normal. It happens. So if you can't work it out, don't be feeling like, oh my goodness, something's off here with me. Understand that you're approaching questions. Those are important questions to think about. And there are ways to approach them. And that's a sign of good parenting if you sort through how best to approach them. And we are going to get to them, and we're not going to leave you without thoughts of ways that might be right for you. And that's different for different people. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to my friend now.
Thank you. So it should be no surprise to anyone that the COVID-19 pandemic has only increased conflict in these areas and just added a layer of worry and complexity to what was already often quite difficult. What we're really seeing are more conflicts related generally to about 3 areas, which are about health, childcare and education, and finances. So if we were to go back to our hypothetical with Betty and David and James, James is now 6 and he's not in school, he's home. So in this, we're gonna pretend that Betty is an essential worker and she works outside the house, and David is able to do his job for pay in the house. What is it gonna look like to provide schooling for James? Who is gonna supervise that? Are the parents going to agree about the level of supervision he requires? If it's Betty who's responsible for supervising his schooling, then how's that going to work with her job outside of the house? And if it's David, how is he also going to perform all the duties of his paying job? So they might have conflicts about that. They also might have conflicts about the transfer between the households. We have seen many people who say maybe the child should just be in one household, but obviously both parents have to feel comfortable with that, and that is not always the case. In our situation, James lives close by. No matter where he is, he can reach either parent by walking, but we have many children who need to take public transportation between households, and we have many parents who are living with roommates or other people, and all of those add an additional layer of concern for some people when there is a virus at issue. That leads to health, and in health we're seeing a lot of concern. Parents have different rules about how they should treat this virus. In our situation, Betty works outside the home, so that's a very different situation from David, who can stay home. And they may really have conflict about how that should be handled for James. Obviously, finances are a big issue right now. Many people made their financial commitments, and they are no longer in the same financial situation that they were in January. We've seen a lot of people with serious hardship, and child support, rent, these are all going to be affected. And when you're co-parenting with someone who you're no longer with, it impacts them as well. And then we really would be remiss if we did not mention that there has been a spike in domestic violence and child abuse, and there are places to go for those too. So in our resource list, we give some referrals. Really notably, Safe Horizons is an excellent place to call.
Okay. So thank you. Now we're up to, what do you do? What are your options? And we would like to just provide you 3 basic paths to consider when you have difficulty sorting these issues out on your own. One is court, one is legal paths, and the third, which is the one Barbara and I love, is mediation. And we'll talk to you about that one last. But let's first talk about court. Parents, when they want to have another person decide what their plan might look like, would look like, could file in normal times in family court. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, you can't do that, but the time will come when you can. And then what one does is, depending on where you live, you make a filing in that court, and then a judge will determine what the plan is for you. So let's say Betty and David said, I'm not comfortable sitting down with you, or I don't want to sit down with you, or I want someone else to decide. Then a judge might say, okay, James, you're gonna live now 4 days with David and 3 days with Betty, or 3 days with David and 4 days with 3 days with David and 4 days with Betty, and all of those. And maybe you decide together on education or health or religion, but the judge or the magistrate might make that decision and issue an order. That is helpful for people that it's not appropriate for them to sit together, or they don't want to, and they can go to court and get that done eventually. Not yet, but eventually. Number 2 is generally what I would call a legal path. Sometimes people go and get legal advice. So one could go to an entity that could provide free or sliding scale advice. And we have these references in our referrals as well, and say, kind of, what can I think about and what might I do? And then I'm going to sort it out on my own. That's one way. And then sometimes people hire an advocate to negotiate a plan with the other person or the other person's advocate. That's a legal path. Those negotiated agreements usually are for a fee, sometimes sliding scale, but those are done. Now we're going to get to mediation, which is what Barbara and I do and value greatly. The mediation centers in New York City and across the state provide the service for free for appropriate families. And this is what happens. A neutral person or 2 neutral people, sometimes we do 2 mediators, it depends, meets with both parties, both parents, and here's what the concerns are, just what's going on. Then we sort through what are all the various options that you have, and then together the parents craft a plan that is very tailored to their situation. Now, what I love about this is who knows best about Betty's life than Betty? Who knows best about David's life than David? What he can do, what he can't do. Who knows best about James than both David and Betty? And so when they can, with the help of a mediator, sort through what their differences are, and then figure out what their possibilities are, what the options are there, and then craft a plan that really can be tailored to their specific situation. Then what happens, assuming they work it out, and much of the time they do, but mediators don't tell you what to do. We're not judges. So it's not always, but that's part of the reason you get to make those decisions in mediation. The mediator will write up an agreement, and then parents have a decision to make. Sometimes simply having it written out and having this list of who's in charge of what, who decides if there's a medical decision, or do we consult unless it's an emergency? What happens each day of the week that's regular? Where does our child live, right? On Father's Day, does James go with David? Okay, it's worked out. On Mother's Day with Betty? Okay, it's worked out. These details are put into the agreement, and then the parents can have that between themselves if they like, or if they want it legally binding, then they can bring it to court and ask the court to so order it. Now, I'm going to tell you, right this very minute, you can't do that, but eventually you can, okay? So in mediation, the mediators help the parents work out their own solutions and their own approach to their situation, and then write it up for them. What are the goals of this? Really, the goals are to have the best design plan that's very specific to your entity without somebody else telling you what to do. The idea is to create a foundation for harmony. If you work it out together, you're more committed to doing it because somebody else isn't telling you what to do. You've said, I can do this, right? That's what you're saying. So it's more harmonious. It also reduces stress on your child, because if you work these matters out, the child's not hearing the parents having these disagreements all the time. That's good for them. And also, it's really good for the parents. Nobody likes to have constant arguments. And so if you can look at this document and say, oh yes, when we have a question about education, the path was X person will do research, present it to the other, and then make a decision together, or whatever it is right for those parents, because you've agreed to it. It makes sense to you. Okay, so the idea is really that you're also modeling good behavior for your child, because you're showing them that even when there's a difference, you can work it out. Barbara, I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Thank you. I just want to point out before we move on that again, there is a community dispute resolution center, or a center that can do mediation in each borough that provides these services. So we work for the New York Peace Institute, and that provides services for Brooklyn and Manhattan. And if you live elsewhere, then please consult our referral sheet, because there's a certain center where you should call first. I also want to point out that for the legal services, we're given a variety of services, and you can get legal advice without paying for it. There are places to go for that, and they do vary. Some of it's more of a hotline, and some of it's more one-on-one attention on a sliding scale. So I think we're going to turn to questions, and we received a question from someone. I'm so glad you asked this question, because I wanted to highlight this issue. And the question was, do you have to be in the same room to mediate? So here's the real truth, is that prior to the COVID pandemic, we were mediating at our center. And yes, you did have to be in the same room with your co-parent in order to have the conversation. Again, you would be with two mediators at that time. Now we are able to provide our services remotely. So people are not in the same room, but they're in the same virtual space with the goal of having a conversation. Carol, do you want to take the next one?
I do, but I was remiss in saying, in not adding that when someone's first language is not English, we can also work with you. We can work with interpreters as well. And so I don't want anyone to feel if English is not your first language, we can't work with you. We can figure that one out too. Okay, so I did want to add that as well. Now I'll get to this question. So someone said, and it's a really interesting question. Someone's saying, well, are these services really limited only to parents who are not together as a couple? And the answer to you is that we can mediate cases between parents. We absolutely can who are together as a couple. What we can't do, because we're not therapists, we can't provide therapy, we can't provide family counseling, but we can provide services in appropriate cases as well. The other item I wanted to underscore, because I'm not certain that I was clear, is sometimes parents are together in the same physical space, because this is New York City, but they are not together as a couple anymore. Lots of reasons for that. We all know that rents are horrendous in New York City, and sometimes also just moving, especially now that now we have a pandemic, it makes it harder still. It is our position that those parents are still co-parenting. And in some ways, because you're seeing each other every minute of every day or lots of times, it speaks to more of providing a service. And so we're absolutely available for those people as well. I'm not sure if I was clear on that. So wanted to add that as well. Barbara, is there another one?
Well, I actually see one in the chat. And the question is, if you have two mediators, what do you do if the mediators don't agree? So here's the way that we work it. We have co-mediators who are trained to help facilitate a conversation between the two co-parents. So we as mediators don't have to agree, because we're not going to give you an opinion, and we're not going to weigh in, and we're not going to say, well, I really think you should be doing this, because it's about your life and your family, and what's best is really going to be something that the two of you come up with. And we do really believe that. So there won't be a situation where the mediators don't agree, because they won't be weighing in. But having two people in the room who can help facilitate the conversation, we have found, makes things just go smoothly, and provide support for the mediators. And they all have different approaches, and we've been happy with that system.
Okay, I saw another question, and someone said, Carol, you talked about 2 paths, and I thought you said 3. So I want to go through them again, because I obviously wasn't clear, okay? The first that and I'm going to take the one that might have been missed last. The first was legal referrals, going to a lawyer or a non-lawyer advocate. So for example, there's this wonderful organization called Lieb, Legal Information for Families Today. They have a hotline. They also have a call-in, and you may or may not get a lawyer, but you can get legal direction and legal advice there. The second, and the service that we provide, is mediation. Mediators will not give you legal advice. We will not weigh in, as Barbara said. We're there to help you sort through your concerns and your options and what's right for all of you. But our opinion really just doesn't matter. Now, what we will do, though, is we know if one goes to court, what a court might look for, and we will give you the opportunity to walk through a whole series of questions that we know that a family court judge will look for. So we will offer those questions to you, but it's up to you as parents to decide whether you want to address them. Okay, so we will do that, but that we're not going to tell you it's your right to do this, it's your right to do that. Not for us. So option number 1 was that legal route. Option number 2 was mediation. The third And maybe it wasn't heard because the courts aren't really receiving cases now, or family court. So for people that can't or don't want to access mediation and don't want to go to a legal referral, they can go to court and file and have a judge or a magistrate then eventually, not now, but eventually resolve their differences. So that's the third: court, legal, and mediation being the third. Okay. And just like mediation centers, one for every borough, except, well, we have Brooklyn and Manhattan, but assigned based on where people live, the family courts are the same based on where you live. Okay. And we have those referenced in our materials as well. So sorry, I wasn't clear on that. I hope that clarified it. I think we have a couple more questions now, Barbara.
Yes, I have one. The question is, does mediation work if one parent is hostile and won't easily negotiate? And so, you know, I really want to be honest. These are hard conversations. This is a hard thing to do. Co-parents often have a long history together, and there could be a lot of pain and hurt and anger there. Mediation, though, is voluntary, which means that we don't have a mediation if both parties don't want to be there. And so as mediators, we're trained to help make that conversation be as productive as possible. Does it settle every time? Absolutely not. And I would be lying if I said that it did. But do we help resolve things for many people who did not necessarily think we would be able to? And I would really want to say it wasn't really us who did it, it was them. But do we help a lot of people come to some resolutions for their families? Many. And we've been really happy with so many outcomes and really gratified to see what it's been able to do for many families.
So we now have a parent who's saying, look, I've been to mediation. I submitted my agreement to family court. It was so ordered. And now basically it looks like this person's saying, can we modify that? Or what's the process for modifying that? So if it's so ordered, you can still go back to mediation. You don't have to go back to family court. You could actually go straight to mediation, or you could go to family court, your choice. And then either get a new order from family court, or if you mediate something and make a change, you want to make a change, let's say in the case of David and Betty, let's say it was so ordered that David then had James 4 days a week and Betty 3, and then their circumstances changed, right? And maybe Betty's working a ton of hours and she really says, much as I love James, I really think he could benefit from having his dad around more. So they could go back, they could come to mediation, come out with 5 and 2, and then bring that agreement back to family court to have it so ordered again. So you can modify, but once it's so ordered, you want to go back to court and have it so ordered again. Okay? I hope that answered that question. I think there are a couple more, Barbara. Did you?
Yeah, I think so. One person asked you gave 3 options. Is there a particular order? What order should you go? And the truth is there is no order. If you want legal advice though, then I think it does make sense to seek that and not a mediator. As mediators, again, we're not going to weigh in on your situation and give you legal advice. If you want to have a hand in creating the solution for your family, then mediation is a great option. And if you think you really need someone else to make the decision for you, then family court is probably a better pathway for you. But there's no option, there's no order in which you should be proceeding. It's really about what's right for you. And I would also say that you're always free to call and learn more about mediation, or call a hotline like Lieb to ask more about legal advice before you make these decisions. Okay.
So there's a parent that's saying, look, what do I do if I see my child is really being stressed by these arguments? And here's what I'm going to tell you. I'm a mediator, and I think that's not, I think there are places to go. So in our materials, you're going to see, for example, parenting supports. I would say that's a place you might want to go. And there are other places we can give you referrals to. But I don't like to make it a practice of giving advice in an area where I may have a gut reaction, but I'm not really an expert. And here's what I'm going to say. You're going to get that if you call us. If this is not for us, we're not going to just do something off the top of our heads, but we're going to try to find you a place where someone can support you properly. So it's a real question. It's a real question, and I hear it, but I'd like to direct you to the right place on that one. Okay?
I had a question we received about if you have a family that already has a co-parenting plan and it is working, and now you're just having issues about the COVID situation, is that something that you can mediate? And the answer is that many people are having new issues regarding this situation. And there are many families who call in where the child has been with one parent the entire time, and that's not comfortable for both of them. And we see a lot of different issues, as we had mentioned before. So you absolutely could come to mediation and keep that other agreement intact and just deal with the COVID issues, if that's what you'd like. Mediation is really about what you want to address. When you come to us, we don't have an agenda. We really want to deal with the things that matter to you.
And we're seeing a lot of COVID-related mediations at this point, right, Barbara? It's stressful, and it's hard, and it is uncharted. And so we're seeing a lot of that. I'm not sure if we told everyone that we're providing these services virtually. So we're doing this all, I'm sorry, but we're doing this all by video conference. Obviously, we're not bringing people together, but I think it's important to say that as well. So we're doing this all, and it's working. It's really a wonderful service. So I did want to say that. Now, a parent just asked, what happens? I've been back and forth in court. We don't have a final order, and yet we got a lot of stuff we want to resolve, and now court's basically frozen. Can I go to mediation? I'm filed in court, but can I go to mediation? I don't have a final order. And the short answer is yes. And we're seeing that. So what we could do is help you mediate some of the issues if both parents want, and it's voluntary. So both parents have to want that, but we can do that and write an agreement if you resolve it, and you could bring it to court when it reopens and ask for it to be so ordered. So the answer is yes, we can do that. Okay.
You seeing another one, Carol?
Well, I'm seeing an increased number, but let's just see. There's one on the bottom, Barbara. You want me to do it? I see it.
Okay, that would be great.
Okay, so the question here, this parent's saying, at what age do the child's preferences supersede the parents? And the answer is, parents have to make their own decisions about what's right for their child. And it gets harder and harder. But we do not bring children into mediation sessions we do for some kinds of cases, for educational cases, but not for co-parenting cases. That's for darn sure. Parents can talk with their children. At the end of the day, until the child is of age of majority, the parent is making the decisions for that child. Now, there are some very limited circumstances where in court-related matters that I really want to put on the side, because this is legal advice, that sometimes there are other things going on. But I'd like to put that on the side there, because those are particular kinds of cases. But in the general kind of case where parents are not together and the child is, maybe a teenager, parents can talk to their children. At the end of the day, they are going to make the decisions. They're the parents. And depending on how you know your child and how old they are and how much weight you will give them, but you decide as a parent, but the child's decisions or preferences do not supersede the parents. They don't. Except there are some court situations. I want to put them on the side. Okay. I'm seeing another question because the number just increased here.
I see one too. The question was, Does it matter if you're married or not married in terms of mediation? And so the answer is we welcome co-parents, whether they're married or not married, whether they're in a relationship or not in any way. I will say though, if you are married and you come to our center, we do not do the complete divorce. We are a co-parenting program. So we will deal with things like custody, visitation, parenting decisions, schedules, and we can deal with child support, but we won't do things like divide assets in a divorce.
Okay. I'm seeing another question, and we see this with some regularity as well. And this parent is saying, look, we have a child with a disability, and the parents have a different approach, each one of them, to how to support that child, how much support and how to do it. What do we do? And I would say that is a really good conversation to be supported by mediators. We have mediators who are duly trained in both co-parenting and also in children with disabilities. And so when we would hear that situation, if both parents want to have support around that conversation, we'd figure out mediators that could have knowledge base, not to make decisions, but to understand better what's going on for you. So the answer to you is you can have a supported conversation. That's really important. That's really, really an important conversation, because maybe it's about education. Maybe it's about transition to when education is done. Depends on what your child's disability is, but we can support that. We really can, and have, I would say, and certainly we have in the past. So thank you for that question as well. Do we have another one? I'm also trying to keep an eye on time because I think we're going to have to wrap up pretty soon as well.
I think we covered them.
Okay, well that's good, because I do think that we're supposed to wrap up pretty soon. I think we could take maybe one more if anybody has one. Let me just take a quick peek to make sure. I think we've gotten them all. Okay, apologies if we haven't. I also do want to underscore that if you have something private, you can call us if you're Brooklyn and Manhattan, you can call the other mediation centers, or if you choose the legal route, you can call the other entities as well. And we can have those conversations offline. Anybody that works in this area knows that some of these conversations are tender, and we want to treat them with respect and dignity. And so do not feel that don't give it a moment's thought. People are there for you in the right place to have those conversations and tell you possible ways to go. Okay? All right, so I think what I'd like to do now is let you know that Include does have these amazing hotlines. I'm just going to tell you, and I want to read you the numbers because I don't have them in my head. Include has these, and they're really, really super. The English hotline is 212-677-4660. I'm going to read it to you again. 212-677-4660. And the Spanish hotline is 212-677-4668. Once again, 212-677-4668. I'm going to remind you to call the court. That's if you wish to go to court in the appropriate borough where you live, and if you seek mediation, to call the appropriate mediation center in where you live. I also do want to remind you that there are lots of referrals in those handouts, and use them. But if we didn't hit something that's important to you, give us a call. When we put that together, we put together what we thought might be most appropriate. We put a short list, but we've got lots of referrals, and we're happy. We'd like to support these conversations, really would. Okay, so I want to say thank you for giving us this opportunity. I really want you to leave knowing, A, there are supports, B, this by being here, by thinking about these issues and thinking about what's the best path for you, that's great parenting. And so I want you to really know that people are there, whether it's mediation for us or a court or whatever, there are paths for you. And by thinking about this, you're really doing the best you can for your child. So with thanks and appreciation, and be in touch if it's appropriate for you. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, thank you.